February 2nd, 2026, chapter 15.2 in Buddha Dhamma, section 4, A Worthy Life, compiled by Somdet Prabhuta Agosa Charya, English name, P.A. Payuto. 15.2, page 1410 to 1424. The role of reflection in spiritual training and wisdom development. We're going to cover the process of thinking, the commencements of training, A. B, the process of thinking and training. C, basic elements of spiritual training. And D, thinking conducive to spiritual training. 15.2, the role of reflection in training of wisdom development. Before discussing the various methods of thinking, let us take a moment to review the role of thinking in spiritual training, especially in the areas of wisdom development, which is the core of such training. A, commencement of training. The essence of spiritual training is self-development and wisdom development at its core. The key elements of such training, Titso Sika or Sika, are correct understanding, opinions, ways of thinking, attitudes, values which benefits one's life, society, and conforms to truth. This refers to Samma-titi, right view. When one understands things correctly, one's thoughts, one's speech, and one's physical actions, that is, all one's actions, will be correct, virtuous, and beneficial, leading us to the end of dukkha, the end of suffering. Conversely, if one has incorrect understanding, values, attitudes, and ways of thinking, collectively referring as to miccha-titi, wrong view, all of one's actions, including one's thoughts, speech, and physical actions, will also be incorrect. Instead of solving problems and ending dukkha, suffering, one will create more dukkha, accumulate problems, and increase trouble. Samma-titi, right view, can be separated into two levels. The first level of Samma-titi is those kinds of views, thoughts, opinions, beliefs, preferences, and values which are connected to the awareness of one's actions and the effects of such actions, which foster a sense of personal accountability. One sees things correctly in line of the Dhamma teaching, satana. The precise term for the kind of view is kammasakata-nana, knowledge of being an owner of one's deeds, of one's actions. It is a conscious, mundane right view, lokiya samma-titi, and pertains to the level of moral conduct. Secondly, those views and ways of thinking which helps to discern how all conditioned things exist in accord with the laws of causality, law of karma, cause and effect. It is the understanding that all things, according how they really are, one is not biased by preferences and aversions or swayed by how one wants things to be or not to be. It's an knowledge in harmony with natural truth, and it is technically referred as to satcha nulomika nana, knowledge consistent with the truth. It is samma-titi, right view align with transcendent understanding and pertains to the level of absolute truth. Micha-titi, however, wrong view, likewise is compared to two kinds. Those views, notions, values which deny the sense of personal accountability, a refusal to admit one's own responsibility, and an ignorance of the world as it really is. The formation of diluted images according to how one's personal wants the world to be. In any case, the internal spiritual training of an individual begins with and continues the results of engagement with his or her external environment. It is dependent on external influences which acts as a source of motivation or conditioning factors. If one receives teachings, advice, and transmissions from correct sources, or if one is able to select, discern, and contemplate and engage with things properly, samadhi, right view, will arise and true training will ensue. Conversely, if one receives incorrect training, teachings, incorrect advice, and transmissions, if one is unable to reflect on, consider, and gain insight into one's experiences, micha-titi, wrong view, will arise and one will train incorrectly or not train at all. To review, there are two basic sources of spiritual training, which are called the prerequisites for samadhi, right view. The first one is parato kosa, the external factor of instructions of others, the words and utterance of others. This refers to social influences, transmission. Take an example from parents, teacher, friends, associates, books, the media, and one's culture. These outside influences provide correct information and teaching, and they encourage one to go in a wholesome direction. Secondly, yoniso manasikara. This is the internal factor of reason analysis, sound judgment, applied thought, to be skilled to add reflection, to apply proper methods of thinking, and of proper reasoning. Similarly, there are two sources to wrong training, or the lack of spiritual training, which are the prerequisites to micha-titi, wrong view, incorrect, akusala dharmas, unwholesome instruction by others, and the absence of yoniso manasikara, which is aso yoniso manasikara, and an inability to reflect wisely. B, the process of training. As mentioned above, the essence of spiritual training is samadhi, right view. When samadhi, right view, is firmly established, spiritual training proceeds effectively. This process is divided into three major stages, which collectively are referred to as the Titso Sika, or the three trainings, or the threefold training. The first one is Ati Sila Sika, training in higher virtue, training in the area of conduct, moral discipline, uprightness in physical actions, in speech and livelihood. It can be simply referred as to Sila, virtue. The second is Ati Sita Sika, training into the higher mind, training of the mind, the cultivation of spiritual qualities, and the development of mental strength, mental aptitude, mental health. It can be simply referred as concentration or mental connectedness, samadhi. The third, Ati Panya Sika, training into the higher wisdom, the development of wisdom giving rise to knowledge of things as they truly are, a discernment of causal nature of things which enables one to solve problems in line with cause and effect, a thorough understanding of arisen phenomenon to the extent that one is able to liberate the mind from all clinging and attachment, eliminate mental defilements, and bring an end to dukkha, suffering, to live with a mind that is free, pure, joyous, and bright. It can be simply referred as panya, wisdom. The formation of these three trainings is directly connected to the teaching referred as Arya Magga, the Noble Path, the Supreme Way, the noble method for solving problems belonging to the noble ones, or the path leading to Nirodha, cessation of suffering, and the states of awakening. Arya Magga, the Noble Path, contains 8 essential factors, or 8 aspects of practice. The first one is samatiti, right view, correct views, ideas, opinions, beliefs, attitudes, and values, to see things according to causes and conditions, to see things in harmony with truth or with reality. Second, samma sankappa, right thought, thoughts, considerations, and motives which do not harm oneself or others, are not corrupted by defilements, and are conducive to well-being and happiness. The thoughts of renunciation, well-wishing, kindness, and benefaction, pure, truthful, and righteous thoughts, thoughts free from selfishness, covetousness, anger, hatred, and malice. The third, samma vacha, right speech, honest, upright speech, speech that is not abusive, deceitful, decisive, slanderous, coarse, trivial, or pointless. Speech that is polite, gentle, promoting friendship and harmony, rational, beneficial speech. The fourth, samma kammanta, right action, righteous, beneficial actions, non-oppressive, non-harmful actions, actions that build good relationships, promote cooperation, lead to a peaceful society. Specifically, this refers to actions that are not involved in or contributive to killing or physical injury, to violating the belongings of others, or to violating the rights of others in regard to their spouse or cherished items and people. Fifthly, samma avijja, right livelihood, earning a living in righteous ways, which do not cause trouble or harms to others. 6, samma vayama, right effort, righteous effort, that is, to strive to prevent and avoid unarisen evil. Unwholesome qualities, to strive to abandon, eliminate arisen evil. Unwholesome qualities, to strive to establish and foster unarisen wholesome qualities, and to strive to cultivate and increase the perfect wholesome qualities. 7th, samma sati, right concentration or right mindfulness, is to be vigilant, attentive, to sustain attention, or whichever necessary task one faces in the moment or at the moment, to be circumspect about one's activity, to recollect these virtuous, supportive, or required factors connected to specific activities, to not be absent-minded, careless, or negligent. Most notably, this refers to mindfulness fully attentive to one's own physical activities, feelings, state of mind, and thoughts. One does not allow alluring or annoying sense impressions to lead one astray or to cause confusion. 8th, samma samadhi, firmly established attention. The mind is focused on the activity or an object of attention, aramana. Mind is one-pointed, calm, relaxed, pure, bright, and strong. It is malleable and engaged, ready for the effective application of panya, wisdom. It is not distracted. It cannot be disturbed. It cannot be confused. It cannot be stressed. It cannot be rigid or despondent. The Tiso Sika, the threefold training, is designed to bear fruit according to the principles of practice inherent in the Noble Eightfold Path. This training generates and develops the 8 path factors. A Dhamma practitioner that makes full use of these path factors and gradually solves problems until he or she reaches the complete end of dukkha, suffering. The relationship between the threefold training and the eightfold path is as follows. First, training in higher virtue. Aspects of training give rise to right speech, right action, and right livelihood. These three path factors are cultivated to the point where one reaches the standard of noble beings in regard to moral conduct, discipline, and skillful social interaction. This is the basis for developing the power of mind. Second, training in the higher mind. Aspects of training give rise to right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. These three path factors are cultivated to the point where one reaches the standard of noble beings in regard to spiritual qualities, powers of mind, mental capability, and mental health. This is the basis for developing wisdom. Third, training in higher wisdom. Aspects of training giving rise to right view, right thought. These two path factors are cultivated to the point where one reaches the standard of noble beings in regard to wisdom. One's mind is bright, joyous, and free from all forms of grasping and affliction. One reaches true deliverance of mind by way of wisdom. As mentioned above, samadhi, right view, the mainstay of spiritual training arises dependent on two factors. The prerequisites for samadhi, right view, which are the source, origin, and starting point of practice. Therefore, in the activities pertaining to spiritual training, special emphasis should be given to these two factors. Indeed, the expressions providing training relates precisely to these two factors. As for the three stages of training, sila, samadhi, and panya, they are used simply as reference points for creating a supportive environment and for ensuring the direction of practice proceed according to proper principles. Based on this understanding, one is able to outline spiritual training as shown. Now, the starting point of the source of training is samadhi. We have external influence, and then we have the internal influence. The process of thinking is the factors supportive to our environment, either of higher virtue, higher mind, and higher wisdom. Now, the basic elements for spiritual training from the above section, we see that thinking or reflection comprises of two initial factors, the external and the internal. To gain a clear understanding of the vital role of thought, however, it should be explained in conjunction with the second factors of the teaching of others. Bhikkhus, there are two conditioning giving rise to samadhi, right view, the words of others, and yoniso manasikara, rise reflection. In reference to external factors, I know not of any other single factor so conducive to great benefit of having a virtuous friend. In reference to an internal factor, I know not only other single factors so conducive to great benefit as yoniso manasikara, wise reflection. These two prerequisites of samadhi can also be called the forerunners to spiritual training. They are wellspring of right view, which is the starting point and key principle of spiritual practice in its entirety. Let us review these factors in more depth. The first one is parato kosa, the words of others. External motivation and influence, teaching, advice, instructions, transmissions, schooling, proclamations, information, and news coming from external sources. This also includes imitating and emulating others' behavior. Think about that. Imitating and emulating others' behavior and ideas. It is an external or social factors. The example of such sources of learning includes one's parents, teachers, mentors, friends, companions, co-workers, bosses, employees, the famous and esteemed peoples, books, other forms of media, and religious and cultural institutions. In this context, it refers specifically to those external influences leading one into a correct, wholesome direction, providing correct knowledge, in particular to those enabling to attain the second factor which is Yoniso Manasikara, wise reflection. A person with suitable attributes and qualities who is able to perform the functions of instruction well is called Kalala Mitra, a virtuous friend. Generally speaking, for a virtuous friend to act effectively and succeed in instructing others, he or she must be able to instill confidence in the student or the practitioner. It's very important. And therefore, the method of learning here is referred to the way of sattha, faith. If the person offering instruction, parents or teachers, are unable to establish a sense of trust in the pupil, in the child, the case may be, so subsequently develops greater interest and trust in another source of information and thinking, say of a movie star transmitted via the media or an alternative information, is bad or wrong. The process of sutta, learning, or training, sikha, is beset by danger. The end result may be wrong form of learning or the absence of the true learning. Second, reason analysis or wise reflection. Yoniso Manasikara. Skillful modes of thinking, systematic thinking, the ability to contemplate and discern things according to how they truly exist, the recognition that a specific phenomenon exists just so. One searches for causes and conditions, inquiries into the source of things, traces the complete sequence of events, and analyzes things in order to see things as they are and the conforming laws of causality. One does not attach to or distort things out of personal craving and clinging. Wise reflection leads to well-being and the ability to solve problems. This is an internal spiritual factor. It may be referred to as the way of wisdom. Of these two factors, wise reflection is essential and indispensable. Spiritual training truly bears fruit. It is the goal is reached as the result of Yoniso Manasikara, wise reflection. Indeed, it is possible for wise reflection to initiate spiritual training without the assistance of external influences. If one relies on the first factor of external instruction, it must lead to wise reflection for one's training to reach completion. Intuition, insight, and the discovery and realization of truth is accompanied by way of sound analysis, Yoniso Manasikara, wise reflection. Having said thus, one should not underestimate the power of the first factor, of the instruction by others, because only a minute number of individuals do not need to rely on this factor. Those who progress solely by the application of sound analysis, Yoniso Manasikara. These individuals, like Gautama Buddha, are exceptional. Almost everyone in the world relies on the instruction by others to help show the way. All forms of formal and systematic education, both in the past and in the present, and all forms of schooling in the field of arts and sciences are matters pertaining to the factors of words of others, paratokosa. The wholesome transmission of knowledge by way of virtuous friends thus deserves the utmost care and attention. A point that needs to be reiterated here is that providing an education or skillful instruction, a virtuous friend needs to constantly keep in mind that this instruction must act as a catalyst for the arising of sound analysis, Yoniso Manasikara, in all the students. Then we have D, thinking conducive to spiritual training. Thinking is linked to the following cognitions, or thinking is links and follows cognition. The process of cognition begins at the point where the sense base, one of the sense base, ayatana, encounters a sense object, the sense object, aramana. At this point, vijnana, consciousness, arises. The awareness of the object, aramana. For example, seeing a form with the eye, hearing a sound with the ear, knowing a mental object with the mind. When these processes complete, it is called cognition, or literally, as the Pali term is, basa, contact. When cognition arises, some form of sensation arises, which is feeling, vedana, says either of pleasure or of pain, or relaxation or of discomfort, or a neutral vedana, neutral feeling. At the same time, there arises sanya, the perception of it, or to perceive of it. The naming, the designation, or recognition of the sense object. From here, there follows vitaka, thinking. Vitaka, thoughts, reflection, and deliberation. This process of cognition is the same, regardless of one's encounters and experiences externally, or whether one thinks of something and contemplates it in the mind. Now, using the act of seeing as an example, the process can be illustrated as follows. So we're going to use the eye as the source of. First, we go into the eye, ayatana. Then what comes into focus is the physical form, which is aramana. Seeing, the verb action of it is saku vinana. What arises, or what actually meets the contact point of it, would be basa, contact. From that contact, from that meeting point, we arise vedana, feeling or sensation. After the feeling or sensation, it arises a perception. We create a perception, sanya. Then from sanya, we dwell on it, vitaka, thinking. The act of thinking, vitaka, plays a very important role in determining a person's personality, a person's way of life, as well as shaping society as a whole. Vitaka, thinking, therefore, is the essential factor in spiritual training. Vitaka, however, is itself determined by various factors and conditions. One factor which exerts a powerful influence on thinking is sensation, vedana. In particular, the feelings of pleasure and pain. When people contact sense impressions and experience feelings ordinarily, unless other factors enter to correct or interpret the process, the feeling determined by way of a person thinks. If the feelings are pleasurable or one delights in them, one wishes to acquire or consume the object. This is craving. We call that tanha in an alternative, affirmative sense. If the feelings are painful, oppressive, one is adverse to them. One wishes to escape from, eliminate the object. This is craving in the adverse sense. We call that tanha in that adverse sense. At this point, a person creates elaborate thoughts and ideas about the sense objects, acting at the source of feeling, the object becomes a focus to the person's thinking, accompanied by sanya, memories and perceptions of this object. These proliferations of thought follow the course of one person's likes and aversions. The determining factor for thought are the person's accumulated proclivities, prejudices, habits, disposition, and mental defilements, collectively referred to mental formations, sankhara. He or she thinks within the confines and limitations and along the lines of these mental formations. Expressions of speech and physical actions may then follow in the wake of these thoughts. Even if these thoughts are not expressed as outward actions, they still have an impact on one's person's mind. They limit and constrict the mind and create various forms of mental distress, agitation, disturbance, depression, and confusion. Thoughts related to specific subjects can create mental biases and distortion, resulting in failure to see things according to the truth. While some thoughts may be tainted by greed or hostility, in the case that one experienced neutral sensations, neither pleasurable nor painful, if one is not skilled at reflection and allows oneself to remain under their influence, one's thinking will be aimless and incoherent or completely stifled. This is the unfavorable and unwholesome situation, leading to the problems of greater dukkha, greater suffering. The main factors of this process can be illustrated. We have contact, basa. Then we have sensation, vedana arises. When arises, we have craving, both the affirmative and aversive, the positive and negative forms of tanha. And ultimately, it creates dukkha, suffering, irritation, agitation, stress. For most people, this process of compounding problems occur almost continually. In a single day, it may occur repeatedly and countlessly. The life of a person lacking spiritual training tends to be dominated and determined by way of thinking. It requires no intelligence, understanding, or special capability. It is the most basic way in which a human being operates. And the more a person has accumulated the habit of thinking in this way, the easier this process unfolds automatically, as if struck in a pre-established rut. Because the process functions without any guidance by mindfulness and wisdom, it generates avijja, ignorance. Rather than being conducive to solving problems, it creates more problems and increases dukkha. It is antithetical to spiritual training. Technically, it is thus referred to as the mode of continuality leading to dukkha, to suffering. The basic attributes of this way of thinking is that it serves to gratify tanha, craving. It can be referred as the process of thinking that panders up to tanha, that panders to craving, that assists it, that supports craving. Thinking that causes problems, or simply as the cycle of dukkha. The beginning of spiritual training begins with application of mindfulness and wisdom. Here, a person no longer allows the aforementioned process of thinking or mode of continuality to function unabated and unchecked. One uses mindfulness, wisdom, and other spiritual factors to interpretate or reduce the flow of this way of thinking, resulting in severance of the cycle or a transformation in altered course of thinking. One begins to be liberated, to no longer be enslaved by the process of thinking. At first, an alternative course of thinking may result from views of traditional ways of thinking transmitted by external sources, say by other peoples or social institutions, to which one adheres out of faith. Generally speaking, the most such external instruction can do is to deter or restrain one from blindly following a course of thinking, pandering or supporting to craving, and perhaps it provides one with an alternative fixed pattern of thinking. But it does not necessarily lead to a progressive, independent way of thinking. If the instruction is exceptional, however, it can generate the kind of faith that leads people to think for themselves. An example of the instruction that leads to strictly prescribed, unyielding form of faith, and it is not a vehicle for further contemplation, is to have others believe that everything in the world is governed and controlled by some divine being, or occurs randomly or by accident. If one believes in such teaching, all one has to do is wait for the will of God, or leave everything up to fate. One need not investigate or reflect on things. Conversely, an example of instructions that generates a kind of faith leading to the contemplation is to have others believe that all things exist according to causes and conditions. If one believes this, then no matter what happens, one will investigate and probe into the unyielding causes and conditions. One will develop an increased knowledge and understanding. Wholesome thinking and contemplation induced by faith, sattva, is external instruction, begins with sound analysis, yoniso manasikara. In other words, skillful instruction generates sattva, leading to yoniso manasikara. So skilled instruction generates faith, leading to wise reflection. With the arising of wise reflection, spiritual training has begun. From this point, a person applies and develops wisdom, which helps to solve problems and is the path to cessation of suffering. In a nutshell, thinking that supports and promotes wisdom is spiritual training. Wise reflection plays an especially important role by preventing feeling, vedana, from producing craving. When one applies yoniso manasikara effectively, one experiences feeling, but without it leading to tanha, without craving. And there is no craving. One does not create fanciful ideas. This is called creating mental proliferation, subject to the power of craving. When one severs thinking processes supporting to craving, skillful systematic reflection leads to the path of wisdom development and to the end of suffering. The two kinds of thinking can be shown. You could either have it start off with contact, going into feeling, and then making an opinion from the feeling, either good or bad, the positive or negative effect that turns into either the positive or negative effect of craving, tanha, and ultimately we have dukkha. Or we could start with phassa, that arises feeling, with reason analysis. This is wise reflection. Apply our knowledge that we already have, which is wisdom, and then we can eliminate the suffering. In any case, for ordinary people, even if they have begun a spiritual training, these two ways of thinking arise alternatively. One way of thinking may interfere with another. The first process may unfold until it reaches its craving. But when wise reflection steps in to cut off the process and steer into a new direction, or the latter process may reach the state of wisdom, yet craving in a single guise hijacks the process. It can be thus occur that the fruits of wisdoms are corrupted to serve the interests of craving. When a person who have completed spiritual training, they apply analytical reflection, yoniso manasikara. When they are not thinking, they abide mindfully in the present moment. That is, they are attentive to those activities in which they are engaged. To say that one applies analytical reflection when one thinks also implies that one applies sati, mindfulness. Because wise reflection is the source of nourishment for mindfulness, When the thinking process proceeds in a systematic, purposeful way, attention does not stray or drift aimlessly, mindlessly. The functions to keep attention on the task at hand. Analytical reflection is thus the key factor in spiritual training. Connected to the essential stage of wisdom development, it is required for the living virtuous life, helping to solve problems and acting as the refuge for people. In the gradual process of wisdom development, analytical reflection, wise reflection, is part of the stage beyond faith. Because at this stage, a person begins to think independently from others. Within the system of spiritual training, analytical reflection is the internal factor connected to the development of application of thought. It can be defined as the proper method of thinking, methodological thinking, or analytical thinking. It has the following attributes. It prevents one from looking at things superficially. It leads to self-reliance. It leads to liberation, freedom from suffering, true peace, pure wisdom, which is the highest goal of Buddhism. The preceding material has presented a general instruction to the two internal or initial factors of spiritual training. Paratakosa, the utterances from others, and Karalamitra, having a virtuous friend, which is the internal and external factors dealing with wisdom. Now, from here on, the chapter is focused solely on analytical reflection, Yoniso Manasikara, to elucidate the methods of thinking distinctive to Buddha Dhamma. That's the end of chapter 15.2, the bottom of page 1423.